So I'd like to welcome everyone to the first podcast of the Tunxis Political Awareness Club, otherwise known as TPAC. This is a club created by the students you see before me. I'd like to introduce them now. To my far right is Kevin Short. To my right is Nick Nigro. And to my left is Mike Farnham. So these are the founding fathers of TPAC, and it's a club that was formed this spring semester. And the point of the club was to bring civility back to politics, at least on the local level. And we thought we would have regular scheduled podcasts of various topics. Today the topic is Hartford's fiscal crisis, the budget crisis in Hartford, Connecticut. You may ask, well, how does that relate to Tunxis Community College, which is situated in Farmington? But one of the points we'd like to make today is that what impacts Hartford impacts the rest of the state. And many of the fiscal problems that the state faces are intertwined. And so we think Hartford matters, and it matters to Tunxis indirectly. Certainly matters to Connecticut. And what we have seen in Hartford is indeed a crisis, I would say, not necessarily caused by the people of Hartford. There are extenuating circumstances that we are going to talk about today. And so I want to begin by asking the question to the panelists here. What generally do you think is the reason why Hartford finds itself in fiscal dire straits? It's in great debt. It's been so for years. Most recently, Luke Bronin, the mayor of Hartford, has sought a budget package that is to the tune of $612.9 million. Okay, that relies a lot on state aid, which it may not get. So in general, maybe starting with Kevin, what do you think is the root cause of the budget crisis in Hartford?
I would say the root cause of Hartford's budget crisis today is partially lack of funding from the federal level, but also they have quite a large budget to uphold.
Why do you think they have such a large budget? What consumes a lot of Hartford's budget, would you say?
First off, just schools.
Absolutely.
That right there is a large infrastructure need, and it's expensive.
For the record, the school budget, the K through 12 budget of Hartford, has in fact consumed a lot of money. The budget faces a deficit just like the rest of the city and the rest of the state. So certainly that's a big problem. It eats up an enormous amount of money. So that is certainly accurate. What about you, Nick? What do you think are some of the root causes of Hartford's problems?
I think that Hartford has a problem with, first of all, building the stadium. They shouldn't have done that. I think that was actually a waste of money because instead of investing in what you guys were saying, schools, education in general, amongst other things like infrastructure, they go and invest in playing games instead of, what really matters is the future of, children.
On behalf of the yard goats, I think many people, and goats may take offense to that, but the fact is that the stadium has cost an estimated $80 million. And so, Nick, you're bringing up the point that at a time when the city is in need of money,
Yes.
it's kind of inappropriate to spend $80 million on a minor league baseball team.
Yes.
Is that your point?
Yep.
Okay, I think many echo those sentiments. The initial thinking behind the Hartford Yard Goats was that it would bring in revenue. That it was
Revenue,
a
yep.
source of investment.
Yes. But instead of that, they what happened is that it got halted due to many problems with what do you call it, workers, and they had to halt it because of that.
Yes.
So
Mismanagement, too, has been a product of that. What about you, Mike? What do you think is the root cause? Certainly the stadium debacle is a point of contention.
Well, Kevin and Nick do make a good point about as far as root causes go. It's difficult to say what the root cause is because there are many gears that intertwine to this major machine and why it's breaking down.
Okay.
As far as I see, yes, education does play a significant role in its budget. There are many schools in Hartford, many struggling students who are just barely keeping afloat of just graduating high school. As far as it goes, their investments into creating buildings versus restoring infrastructures in the city do play another part. Um, Overall, I think it is just the management of where the money's going to. As far as I can see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but use of money for certain purposes that have been given to the city by the state or by other sources have been at times in the past misused for other reasons. And I see that as being a fair cause to what has created the situation that is in Hartford today.
Right. You mentioned the school system obviously consumes a large chunk. The superintendent, Leslie Torres Rodriguez, has recently made the statement that there are too many schools in the Hartford school system to actually educate the students there in an appropriate way. And so the fact is that Hartford suffers, in a sense, from the same thing that the state suffers from. Lots of different school boards. You've got to pay these administrators lots of money, and a lot of the money goes toward paying those administrators, but not into the hands of the school children, and that's a big
And
problem.
especially teachers too.
You're saying teachers get too much or not enough?
Not enough.
Okay, I am one to agree completely with that. I don't think
Yes.
teachers get paid enough, but that's just me.
They go in front of the students every day to teach them something, and they're not even given the what do you call they can't even make up their own. Not just that, they can't even make up their own curriculum, and they're given basically what to teach the children, which is bad.
I've heard many Hartford teachers say that they feel handcuffed by the fact that they have to teach
Yeah.
to standardized tests. And
Yep.
these tests are results oriented without actually taking into account what they're actually teaching their kids.
I didn't go to Hartford, but I went. I was in Meriden when I went to high school, and I remember we were always taking tests, and that's the problem. You know, instead of learning in school, we're taking tests, and that's the problem.
Kevin?
I would agree. There's an overemphasis on this standardized testing just for the metrics' sake, I feel, which is not really right because these students aren't going to learn real world applications for the learning. I mean, there is a bleed through there, but I don't feel it's probably in their best interest, strictly speaking.
I think one of the points that always comes up in a conversation about Hartford's finances is the state's finances. And as I indicated at the start of our program, the fact is that Hartford's budget relies upon a huge sum of money from the state. And
Yes.
we live in a time in Connecticut when the state is essentially broke.
And federal donations.
Federal donations are down, and so it's this reverberating effect from the federal to the state to the local governments.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Hartford is not situated well financially. It doesn't receive enough funding. It doesn't receive enough money in property taxes because it doesn't have enough property owners to bring in that revenue. Unlike suburban towns, the wealthy towns get a lot of money from their property tax base. And so the result of that is that Hartford is experiencing a shortfall every which way. But my next question is, what do we do about the state's fiscal problems? If at the core of Hartford's budget crisis is the state funding or lack thereof, how do we resolve this issue? What's going on with the state of Connecticut?
Want to go first,
Go ahead.
Mike?
Well, if you'd like, Mike, go ahead.
I mean, again, the issue with the state of Connecticut is overall at the moment is due to significant budget cuts. And we are still or the government is still struggling to basically move forward to the deadline of their budget. You know, they're still indecisive on what needs to be cut. And decisions on what one believes to be cut where others disagree is continuing back and forth. It's never ending. And that being said, the deadline for our new budget is the end of this month, end of May. And they still haven't came to terms of agreement in what needs to be finalized.
A little background on that. Way back, I think it was in February, Governor Malloy proposed a state budget which was seen as very controversial.
Yes.
The largest point of contention, I believe, was the idea that the suburban towns with the highest property tax revenue should spread their wealth more evenly to the big cities, which are unfairly out of balance compared to the states and the type of revenues the city gets. So, after Malloy proposed that budget, it was then left up to the state legislature to decide, to the General Assembly to decide what to do with it. And because these legislators have to represent these towns, they're not going for that part of Malloy's plan. And so they're at odds. You have a Democratic-controlled Congress, at least in the House, it's tied in the Senate, that is at odds with Governor Malloy, a member of their own party. And they've been, ever since, trying to figure out what kind of alternative budget proposal to make. Added to that layer of complexity is the fact that the Republicans in the General Assembly have their own ideas. And, while the Democrats think that maybe raising taxes on certain individuals, especially the wealthiest, might be a good idea, the Republicans think that cuts need to be made across the board. And so you have three different proposals, essentially, and not one of them has a consensus.
By raising taxes on the wealthy, I believe that they, we go by a bracket, if you fit a certain bracket, you pay more money or you pay less money. And if you make under a certain amount, you don't pay taxes. I don't believe raising...
Don't pay income taxes.
Don't pay income taxes. And if, by raising money on the wealthy, even more than we have done recently, you're just driving these people out of the state, and that means less revenue altogether. And that's the same thing that happened with the, GE, General Electric, and, amongst other companies that left the state because of higher taxes. So.
Okay, so according to Nick, higher taxes does not work. All it does is take population away from Connecticut, and Connecticut has experienced a population loss since the 1990s.
Yes.
And so there's this narrative out there that the wealthy just leave when they are overly taxed.
Yes.
And, by a lot of different surveys, the Tax Foundation being one of them, Connecticut is one of the most highly taxed states in the country.
And we are one of the richest in the union, which is why we have,
Well, we are, but we're not.
taxes.
It's funny how there was an article that appeared in New York Magazine that made the case that, yes, we are the wealthiest state in some ways, if we look at Fairfield County, but we are among the poorest states if you look at the urban centers. And so it's really a tale of two states. And just this one piece of data, the average 1%er, that is the 1%
1%,
wealthiest,
yep.
Earns 41 times what the average 99% person earns. And so that's staggering to me.
You mean altogether?
Altogether, that's correct.
Wow.
So when you're comparing those two, it's very skewed toward the wealthy. But the problem is when you tax the wealthy too much, it seems that there is an adverse effect on the Connecticut economy. I don't know if Kevin wants to add to the conversation, but I think this is the issue when it comes to the state.
I also feel the same. I mean, the core issue here is we're not taxing. Our tax structure is not accurate, in my opinion. We're not. I mean, I know personal income taxes can be high once you make a certain amount, but at the same time, you are making such a obscene amount. And I know that the economics of it is on the fence.
So do you align yourself more with the Democrats in the legislature that say we need to tax the wealthy more and we need to look for other sources of revenue in terms of fees? Maybe one of the proposals that Governor Malloy has is to tax plastic bags at grocery stores to get more money. That, of course, is not skewed toward the wealthy, but across the board.
Yeah.
What is your solution then? Are you more in line with the Democrats?
I would say so. I would align myself with Bernie Crat as far as the label goes.
Bernie Sanders,
Yep.
who had a remarkable run in the last election. Just came up short to Hillary
I
Clinton.
was a socialist.
I totally feel that we should be seeking out creative solutions for increasing revenue, like maybe tolls. Also, the plastic bag tax kind of would probably be minuscule in my opinion, but at the same time, it could be lucrative. I'm not sure.
Tolls have been brought up, absolutely. It's actually gaining traction in the legislature.
Because I mean, really, our infrastructure is incredibly old nowadays. I mean, and it's degrading rapidly. I mean, you know.
Mike, do you want to add to what Kevin is saying?
I mean, as far as it goes, is to look into solutions to help alleviate with our budget crisis. On one hand, I do agree with taxing plastic bags usage because even if taxing it at what is it for the states, 6.35%.
Well, that's the sales tax.
Yep.
This would be in addition to the sales tax, you have an extra, I think it's 10 cents per plastic bag or something like that. So those are two separate things, but another proposal is to increase the sales tax by
Right.
a few percentage points, or tenths of a percentage point, I should say.
On one hand, it is not a bad idea because even by taxing that, it's a miscellaneous item that most people do not generally acknowledge it.
Okay.
However, some people who do their homework and realize, hey, why am I paying an extra 10 cents on a plastic bag
Right.
when I can just go and bring my own bag from home?
Well, wouldn't that
It's-
add up
it-
also for those who can least afford it?
It would add up. I mean, in one sense, it would add up. It's looking at both sides of the coin, just determining which one is more greater. And I do agree with, overall, I would say that, yes, I do agree with taxing plastic bags, whether it's from 5 cents or an extra 10 cents, can make a huge difference for our state.
I
That-
think the other thing that Kevin mentioned are tolls, which can bring in a huge amount of money.
And we have out of state through traffic, so it's not like it's just Connecticut people.
See a lot of New York plates.
It's interesting. I've heard a lot of criticisms about the toll plan, but a lot of them seem to have an answer. For instance, one of the criticisms that it would be is that it's just another tax on people in Connecticut, because people who live in Connecticut who travel to New York on a weekend day, they will have to pay tolls, and that's essentially a tax. But they have a way of figuring out that, you can give tax credits to those who are Connecticut residents. You can tag a license plate so that those who pass through who are Connecticut residents don't pay as much in toll fees as those who are from out of state.
Right.
So that's an interesting plan. And I think it's gaining traction in the legislature. So that may become a reality sooner rather than later, although it would take a couple of years to implement.
On top of that, when you say that could also become a reality in the near future, I also think that the legalization of marijuana will also be a near reality as well.
Yes, leave it to college students to talk about the legalization of marijuana. It
Well, I
happens
mean, it's-
every conversation we have, but why
It's-
do you say that would be a major source?
It's been a topic that's come up before, and many times before. Colorado just legalized it.
How are things working in Colorado? Do you know? I asked that question not rhetorically, but have you
They-
seen how the plan to
I
legalize
haven't
drugs
read-
there has worked?
I haven't read too much about it, but I know they are making more revenue than they have been in the past, 10 years.
Okay.
And I don't know the exact amount, but they're doing pretty well with the legalization part. And obviously, they're only selling it to residents of Colorado as well.
Well, the whole
And-
point is if you can legalize it, you can do what with it? You tax it, right?
You tax it,
So it's a
yes.
source of revenue.
Yes.
Their legislature was actually considering like giving citizens basically like a bonus from the state because they have so much extra revenue.
Have extra. So
Yes.
Colorado is not experiencing the same fate as Connecticut, apparently.
It would seem not. I also feel we should be increasing taxes on alcohol, tobacco, e-cigarettes, all those things that are
Alcohol tax should
detriments
stay down. Sorry.
to society's health.
On what Alexander Hamilton called vices. Remember, way back, one of our founding fathers,
Yeah.
perhaps the most interesting, thought we should tax whiskey. because
Yeah.
it's a vice, and at the same time, you get money from it.
And then the what do you call it? Not the colonists, because they were then the first Americans at the time. They started to revolt against the newfound American government
Sure.
because of that new tax,
Yeah, that was the
That Whiskey Rebellion.
the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794, if I'm not mistaken.
I didn't know the date.
So obviously, there are sources of revenue that maybe the legislature should consider more seriously. I would say of all of these proposals that we have on the table here, it's the toll issue that will, I think, bring in a lot of revenue. It's interesting, back in 1983, the reason that Connecticut got rid of tolls is because of a major accident that led to the death of a few people. And from that point on, tolls were scrapped.
That long ago?
But yeah, it was that long ago. And the thing is, in our state and local government course, our American government course, one of the points we make is that whenever you build policy on one event, as traumatic and tragic as it is, it's probably not a good idea. And so to bring it back might be at least a partial solution to Connecticut's problems, and hopefully that will kind of trickle down to Hartford as well.
If you wanted to make it specifically or more directed towards out-of-state people too, you just make it along the borders, the toll booths and such.
Do that. Obviously, you would place them in Fairfield County, where much of the traffic comes through,
And
where some of the more wealthy residents are. And
I think that, unions are another problem too. We should definitely decrease the amount of money they get overall. Pensions, people who aren't part of the union who live in the state are paying for these for unions. People members of unions pensions and their salaries, and they earn so much for overtime, and that's really draining the budget. Which is why Governor Malloy is trying to, he was laying off people in the union, and to save us some money, or at least for a little while.
right. So thus far, we've looked at the tax side of things, but Nick is bringing up the point that the state actually has to pay unions and their representatives, the state workers, lots of money in the form of pensions. And we're talking
Yes.
about billions of dollars that the state has not paid as of yet, but that it owes workers. And that is a major reason, it has been said, why Connecticut finds itself in such
A rut.
fiscally hard time.
Yes.
Let me just give you the other side. I want to hear what you all have to say about this. After all, unions entered into agreements with state leaders. These are agreements that were contractually honored on both sides, at least when the contracts were agreed upon. So why shouldn't the state pay these people what is owed to them?
You're asking me?
Absolutely
I'm
should.
asking all three of you.
All right, you go first, Kevin.
They absolutely should pay that. What hold up their promise. I mean that's a part of being honorable.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just a verbal promise, but it was one signed with, and that has dated back since the 1930s. I mean, this is when the state began collective bargaining with major agencies across the state. But the other side of that, of course, is that that is one of the reasons why Connecticut owes a lot of money, that it finds itself in a lot of debt. So you have those two sides of the same coin.
I know we're talking about Connecticut, but the collective bargaining part, all states do that, and even the most conservative of states do that as well, or the red ones,
Can you give me an example?
like Louisiana, Texas, those red states. Alaska's also red as well. Collective bargaining, that's, it's used by every state government, and I believe that's why we're in a mixed, mixed economy, both socialist and capitalistic sentiments.
When you say socialist, can you define that term? I hear my students talk about socialism all the time, the mantra that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, as if
Yeah.
that is something horrible. Tell me what socialism means to you.
I may come off as sounding horrible when it comes to socialism, but I mean, I think if I had to define it, I would say that socialism is basically the government, sharing an interest in, goods and services with the people,
Okay.
It's a form of communism, but not really. Government, controls a lot of things. They control this, they control that, and the people also control this, and they also control this. And while the people control this, they are also paying taxes on this, even though they already have a part of this. And even though the government has a part of this. So that's why I have I'm not too what do you call ecstatic about socialism,
Okay.
because I believe the people should be in control.
So rather than government ownership of goods and services, individuals should be entitled to own their own property.
Yes.
Now, of course, there's another element to socialism, and that is when the people agree that the government should shoulder responsibility for its citizens.
Like-
Democratic
There's another
socialism.
way of putting that too.
Like
Is that more?
Demo-
Hold on, before.
Democratic socialism.
Yes,
It's
and so,
where-
and that's really the thing that Bernie Sanders was proposing. Bernie Sanders is like magic, by the way, because we'll be talking about Hartford, and suddenly somehow it becomes a conversation about Bernie Sanders. I'm not sure how that happens, but it
He makes
does
quite an
all the
impression.
time.
Oh, he's a great man.
So, democratic socialism, right?
I
Which seems to be a more palatable way of saying what it actually is. Are you in support of that?
I am. I view democratic socialism as putting the people's will and the objective collective view in the driver's seat.
Okay,
Like-
interesting way of putting it.
Uh,
Okay, that's certainly a different definition than what Nick gave.
Yeah.
So we have one idea and
Yep.
one term, socialism, with two very different ways of looking at it, and I think that's really
It's an indefinite term. Sorry.
it isn't. It's very amorphous. It's very vague. It can mean a lot of different things to different people, but it's funny how many debate it when they're using different definitions of it, and maybe if we could agree on what it actually meant,
Yep.
we would go a longer way in terms of
That's true.
establishing a consensus. What are your thoughts, Mike?
My thoughts, overall, I do agree and do partially support the idea of a democratic socialist society.
Okay.
Now, given certain standpoints, people look at socialism and stigmatize it as communism.
Right.
Now,
Yeah, those two
that,
are blended together.
they're blended together, but for certain reasons. Originally, excuse me for throwing a little bit of history here, guys, but originally the Communist Party
Yeah.
was to establish a socialistic government. And once they rose to power and started creating the foundation for the government, they said, hey, we like this power, why should we give it up?
Sure.
Which then created that dictatorship that was masqueraded by socialism.
Okay. That's a fairly accurate rendering of history. I'm very, very proud of you for
Thank
that.
you.
That's good.
Thank you. And, when people today look at socialism, they automatically think of communism because that's what it's referred to. But, keep in mind, that's not what the main idea of socialism is been. It's just what we refer back to because that was the only major socialistic government that we can think of in history.
So let's just
Association.
circle it back to our conversation then. Is it possible for a state like Connecticut to implement more socialistic ideas?
No.
Or do you do it as a nation and drift more toward maybe the European model of democratic socialism?
European model of democratic socialism doesn't work as well as our system
I've
works.
heard that before.
Well,
I've also heard that there are certain European nations, Denmark may come to mind, where
That's because they don't have as many people
okay,
and as many
I heard that.
problems.
What's funny is that, a more conservative interpretation of democratic socialism would, whenever someone like a, supporter of socialism brings up the example of Denmark or Sweden,
Yep.
The conservative reply would be, well, yeah, of course, that would be like putting socialism in place in Minnesota,
Yeah.
but not the country. That's a much
for
more
sure.
difficult prospect.
I do want to point out that, okay, yes, on one hand, you are right about population-wise. Denmark has a population of, 5 million?
I don't
6
know the
million?
number, but yeah, they're small.
Very small compared to our country. Yet, at the same time, many of these nations are using socialistic governments that are working to their benefit, no matter the size of the land or the population.
It's
of
not the
people.
land, it's the people.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that it's still able to work. We just have difficulty accepting the possibility of a socialistic government similar to that of the European nations because we have been using, the idea of capitalism for so many years, for over 140 years.
Permanently ingrained into our
It
way
is
of thinking.
permanently engraved, along with sorry if you
No,
want.
no, go ahead.
Along with,
Finish your
again,
point.
with capitalism comes social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. If you work hard, you will succeed in your future. You will have a grand future of making a lot of money.
We're going to get to that point. If you work hard, you'll succeed in a few minutes. But just one final point. Yeah, Denmark has far fewer people than the United States.
Correct.
The United States is a country of, what, about 320 million people.
And
But of
counting.
course, it has a higher tax base than Denmark with those people. So it brings
Yes.
in more money. So
Yep.
why couldn't a more democratic, socialistic sort of state work here?
Just political clout, I feel, is the only
Okay,
problem.
so the politics of it get in the way.
Yeah, I feel people with attachments to certain inflows of cash
Okay.
are
Well,
probably
no,
the problem.
that's a good point. I want to turn to another point, though, that kind of has been made already. We've been talking about Hartford's financial crisis and, by extension, Connecticut's. And so we're looking at it in almost strictly economic terms. There's another side of it. We can look at Hartford first, that it's not necessarily the economy that Hartford needs to fix, but it's its culture.
culture, yep.
It's personal behavior. You see it with the spike in crime in Hartford, especially violent crime. In fact, other types of crime in Hartford is down, but murders are up since
Yes.
around 2013, 2014.
Along with the rest of the country.
And in major cities across the country, we have the Chicago model that is up on the screen. The Chicago murder rate, if you look at it, is sharply up since about 2014. You see that spike upward. Nowhere near the high point of the 1990s just yet, but if it continues in its current trajectory, it will hit that fairly quickly. And so what impacts a city like Chicago, a large city, also impacts a city like Hartford. And here's another sample, according to, I think it's FBI statistics. Crime in America, the 10 most dangerous cities under 200,000. Hartford is in the top 10. It hit number 4.
Wow.
And it gives you the violent crime rate as well as the population and all sorts of other statistics there. But it ranks 4 in the country of smaller cities under 200,000 people. So the question I have for you, and I pose this to my students a lot, is the poverty in Hartford, is the lack of finances in Hartford, is that the reason why crime is up, or is crime the reason why the economy is suffering?
It's, I would say it's more the economic instability that creates the crime rate. Because think about it, if you have, with a budget crisis or economic deflation, you have people get laid off, they lose jobs, people, whether it's benefits, pensions, working, whatever, they lose all of that. So what do they revert to? They're not working anymore. They have to figure out some way to, get money to put food on the table. Or
Let me ask you this. You raise excellent points. When people lose their jobs or there are no prospect of jobs, especially in the urban environment, what do young men often resort to instead?
Crime.
Crime.
But
Crime.
in the form of what? What kind of crime has caused an increase in the murder rate?
Violent crime.
well,
What kind of activity, I should say, has caused an increase in the murder rate?
Drugs.
Drugs, and connected to that?
connected to drugs, you have vandalisms, you have gangs.
Gangs, that's the word I wanted you to say, because gang activity is way up in these cities.
Yep.
And the result is the drug trade intensifies, and there is literally competition for turf, for territory in these areas. And the result of that is that the murder rate increases. And I don't know that it's a coincidence that the murder rate has increased in the wake of, that is to say, after the Great Recession of 2008. So if you're looking to make the argument that it's the economy that produces these conditions, then we do have that data available.
It does.
So you're saying it's the economy
It's
that causes
definitely the economy, but it's also a mix of other things as well, just like it is with every other event. Besides the economy, besides the recession in 2008, nowadays it's also a factor of illegal immigrants coming to the country, finding sanction in cities like Hartford.
Sanctuary, right?
Finding sanctuary in that's what I meant to say.
Mhm.
Sanctuary in cities like Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport. And the thing is, these people, they need to find a, what do you call it? They need to find a place, and they're trying to get jobs and this and that's also building to the burden of people who are already residents of the state,
Okay. So, uh,
amongst
I
other
don't know
things.
that we want to dwell on the idea of undocumented illegal aliens here, but you're saying that is part of the reason why Hartford finds itself in the position that it's in?
Yeah, it's a part, but not the biggest part, but it's a part of it.
If I may, I mean, to add on to what you're saying, Nick, yes, it does create a little bit more of an increasing conflict because think about it, you do have immigrants who are coming to this country to live a better life than the country that they currently lived in.
Yep.
Whether it's in Europe or the Middle East or Asia, or they come to America, they want to live a better life, but with money they afford to live or find a place to live would be places like in New Haven or Bridgeport or Hartford, where the cities themselves are already struggling with getting, trying to create jobs or people who have been laid off so significantly. So now you have that issue
Yep.
with with immigrants that are coming in to look for jobs as well,
Right.
which creates this bit of a conflict where people who were born in America say, well, why is this immigrant coming here to take a job that I'm trying to get for or taking my job instead? It's a back and forth issue about it, but overall, it's what adds on to this conflict that we do face today.
I
And
think the social tensions that are produced from that are real, and but the other side of that, of course, is that if you look at the statistics on immigrants who come here, whether legal or not,
Yep.
let's leave that aside for a
Mhm.
second, because there is a certain concern about the illegality of people coming here without the proper
from
doc-
Canada or Mexico.
doesn't matter where, right? But uh, the data does demonstrate that immigrants who come here, they actually contribute to an economy. They don't detract from it. And I know that one of the narratives that has been floating around a lot lately is that immigrants take jobs away from Americans, but they tend to do the work that Americans have completely disavowed, they have rejected for one reason or another. So, you can make the point that politically, we don't want a society that just has people coming in whenever they feel like it without abiding by the laws of this country. But economically, I don't know that it's a sound argument to say that immigrants take jobs away from Americans. I know that's the
Yeah,
narrative,
it's-
but that's not necessarily the truth
It's
of the matter.
it's really minuscule in my opinion. The largest detraction of economic drive, in my opinion, is wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations taking their money out of our economy
Yep.
and putting it into the Cayman Islands, putting it into Swiss bank accounts,
True.
things that just sit there doing nothing.
Right. So the burden is, for you, placed much more on the wealthy and what they do with their money. They
It
don't
is,
invest it
and-
into the economy. They hide
Yep.
it.
And I
Now,
agree
why
with
do
the
they-
socialist.
I basically agreed, but I mean that greed does create the poverty, which creates the idle hands, which is the devil's work, etc.
Now, let me ask you this. I'll press you. I like pressing students on these issues. It's fun. But if you were very wealthy, you were head of a corporation, right? And, you're making $200 million a year, let's say.
It's
And
not very
rather
wealthy.
than pay taxes on it, you can save an extra $100 million a year by hiding it away completely legally. Would you do it?
Well, the taxes, right as it stands right now, that 100 million would be about 30, as a rough guesstimate.
That's right.
So I would take that 30 and pay the taxes, or I could probably get a sweet tax cut or tax break and pay the 5
Right.
on the taxes
But
and
then there are
put 20
your
into
children and your
my business.
grandchildren to worry about, and so I think it's human nature to maximize as much profit as you can make. That's not to defend the wealthy; it's just to explain why they do the things they do. So maybe it's the politics of it that needs to change, and not
Yeah,
necessarily their
absolutely.
behavior.
Right.
There shouldn't be these legislative loopholes.
Okay, that's
And also the point, the legislative loopholes are being taken advantage of greatly with those who do make a set amount of money. I mean, now, if you were to ask me that question, if I was to make $200 million a year because I'm the head of a corporation, I worked very hard to get from where I started to where I'm at right now.
Right.
Many people would say that, well, I worked very hard for this money, so I deserve to keep as much of it as I can. But at the same time, the ideology was to those who make that much money would be able to use it so it trickles down to the economy.
So the wealthy have a responsibility to society. To
Yes.
do something better with that money.
Yes, but
go ahead.
again, that's where the idea of the conscience conflicts with, I don't want to say greed, but for lack of a better term, that's what it is.
For the collective.
Yeah.
It conflicts with the collective good. Andrew Carnegie, the famous wealthy businessman of the 19th century, he believed it should be a crime to actually pass wealth on to family members, that the better thing to do
Well,
with that
it's-
money is to simply invest it into the economy.
It's very
Philanthropy is-
feudalistic notion.
That's true. You can look at it that way. It's a good point.
Passing money on to, passing your, giving inheritance to your, what do you call, your descendants. There's nothing wrong with that.
You disagree with Carnegie?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And another reason behind my dissension is, or not dissension, but whatever you call it, disagreement is because it's kind of hypocritical if you think about it.
He did the exact thing.
Because he did that exact thing. He gave his wealth to his ancestors or descendants.
Okay.
So that's the reason why I disagree with that.
Well, he took great pride in the fact that he gave $500 million in assistance to libraries and educational institutions. So that's what
Yeah.
he would argue. I'm not defending Carnegie, by the way,
Yeah.
but
It was
just
noble.
to explain
Yep.
where he was coming from.
Well, like you said as well, it's in human nature to want to get more and more and more, and pass it on to your descendants. And that's exactly what most people would do.
Right.
But again, that's a similar idea to social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, where the strongest prosper and the weak just, are, who cares? Now, keep in mind, again, with Andrew Carnegie, he was a Scottish immigrant who came with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few dollars in his pocket, and he managed to create the nation's largest steel industry. Now, he worked very hard to get to where he was at. And he did believe that, in order to be as successful as I am or as I was, you need to work just as hard. But that being said, he didn't want to say, so when I retire, I'm going to give all my money away. He did believe in creating a comfortable foundation for his family to then take place and continue where he left off, or to become big from where they were. At the same time, you can't. Most people are not going to be as successful just because they started off living a very wealthy or very comfortable lifestyle.
In my U.S. History 2 course, I give an assignment that asks students to defend Carnegie, to put yourself in the shoes of Andrew Carnegie and explain the good he produced in society, rather than, the greedy robber baron that he's often presented as, just as a kind of critical thinking exercise.
And again, looking at both sides of the coin, okay, yes, he did make millions and millions of dollars. At one point, he was labeled the richest man in the world after when J.P. Morgan bought his industry. But, he did not really give much benefits. You keep in mind, the American Industrial Revolution, there wasn't really many, safety regulations, pensions.
There was nothing.
Men, women, and children worked in the steel plants 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was brutal. So he didn't have that sort of portrayal at which people do consider him to be a bad man. But at the same time, when he sold his business, when he sold his company, he ended up taking basically all of his money, or most of his money, and spraying it by means, to communities, by libraries, theaters, opera houses, etc. Because he did see that he did have that mindset of believing that you do succeed in life, but you should somehow pay that back to the community.
Sure.
Because it was because of them that made you so successful. And when you think about it,
One of the reasons I like having these conversations is because you never know where they're going to go. And, I thought for sure we'd spend much more time on Bernie Sanders somehow than Andrew Carnegie, but here we are.
I want to back to Hartford as well.
All right,
I
you-
want to continue.
Bring it back to Hartford. Nick.
All right, and I also want to add on what he said.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So the thing is, Andrew Carnegie, I forgot Rockefeller's first name, and the other big shots there.
Jay Gould.
Yeah, all those people, J.P. Morgan, they all made their money in a time when there was no regulations, there was nothing, except survival of the fittest and this and that. And once they made their money, they made ties with politicians to make even more money, and that's the reason why a lot of politicians tied in with these businesses. And coming back to Hartford, that's another reason why the economy is bad. There's a budget crisis, is because you have, politicians worrying about making their own dough, and they're not. Yeah. So that.
You're saying if you want to blame anyone for the position in which Hartford finds itself, blame the politician.
Exactly.
Can you name names? Is that not?
Just politicians in general, but that's everywhere. It's not just in Hartford.
So
but
you wouldn't pin it on Governor Malloy per se, but just collectively as a whole, they just seem to be more
As a whole,
interested
yes.
in preserving their power.
yes.
Okay, do you guys agree with that, Kevin? Do you agree with that notion?
I would say it's much more rampant or maybe viewed on the federal level than the state,
Right.
but I would agree, yeah.
Well, one of the things that is striking to me these days is the loss of faith that people have in our political institutions. And you see it from the national to the state and the local, but especially at the state and local level. People have lost faith in democratic institutions. If you look at Congress's approval rating, just at the federal level, over the last several years, it's hovering around 14%, historic lows. Governor Malloy has a popularity rating in the 25th, 26 percentage point range.
And I'm part of the
And so
86.
that is also a sign of the times. That, by the way, has helped give rise to people like Donald Trump, who's not seen as a politician. And it's happening across the globe, by the way, in
And-
nations like France and with Britain dropping out of the EU. It's all part of the same process. So I think one of the reasons we put these forums on is to just, instruct our students on how to be civically engaged students. And I think if we return to that grassroots level, maybe we can regain some of that lost trust.
And whether it was Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, the thing is, they're all rich, and that's why people lose faith in our democratic systems, because you need to have wealth in order to run for office, and that goes for the politicians in Hartford as well, just like any other city in the U.S.
Would you prefer politicians to not be wealthy?
Yes.
Okay.
I also
So, go ahead.
I also think it ties into actual integrity. Like look at Mitt Romney. He made all those statements at that dinner. Didn't say a word about any of that in public.
You're referring to the 47% or the 49%, I forget the exact number, but the people
Yeah.
who don't really contribute to the system, they just feed off of it, was what Mitt Romney had said, and it was behind closed doors.
Right. Yeah, and the same thing with the DNC during the primaries with Bernie Sanders. They were in court recently, and the DNC made statements about how it doesn't have to be even-handed or impartial, that it can choose leaders behind closed doors. That's undermining actual democracy.
Right. That's an interesting point. I think that maybe speaks to the core issue facing this country, not just Connecticut. You want to add one point, Mike?
I mean, okay, so Nick, you're basically saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that in order it's wrong to be wealthy to run for politics.
No, it's not wrong to be wealthy. I just believe we should have a system where you should run by meritocracy, a system of meritocracy where you deserve to run, not because you have money and influence.
But your ideas are more.
Well, how would you respond to what
Meritus.
he just
Yeah.
said?
I mean,
Is that more comforting to you that he made that point rather than?
Partially, but part of me does believe that major politicians who do run for office, or whether it's for state legislative, for state governor, or president of the United States, a lot of them can be heavily influenced by certain parties, for example, like lobbyists, or be heavily funded by American corporations or corporates that are looking to invest in them to get something back from them
But
that benefit them more or less.
in order to be benefited by lobbyists and other donors, whether anonymous or not, you have to have some sort of influence and wealth in order to get even more money to run.
What you perceive to be the problem.
Yes.
Okay, just
And-
want to be clear on that.
I do agree with that. I do see that as being a bit of a problem because if, based on your credibility or your wealth, you get significant funds from corporations or from a lobbyist party who expect to get something back from you, I see that, from my Blake point of view, as a major loophole. You know,
Well, it's interesting what you both are describing correlates pretty well with the rise of lobbyists, correlates with the decline in trust that people have for political institutions. So I think there's something to that. You raise good points. I also have pictured on the screen a picture of a random kind of dilapidated building in Hartford, Connecticut. And what I find striking about that is just that it's a symbol of what Hartford is perceived as. And I think sometimes we confuse
What is it?
perception with reality. It's just a random building with graffiti on it. It's just symbolic of how run down the general perception of Hartford seems to be. Although it should be noted that Hartford maintains a lot of cultural activity that gets underreported, completely ignored by people on the outside. You have the Wadsworth, you have the Hartford Stage, the Bushnell, and you also have,
That's where all your big insurance companies are, too.
well, where they used to be. I think a lot of them have fled.
That's
And
true.
that speaks to my point, though. Pictured here is the Mark Twain House. And Mark Twain was a man who lived in Hartford at a time when Hartford was the richest city in America. The richest city in
I didn't know
America
that.
in the late 19th century, at the same time that Andrew Carnegie lived. And I think that's interesting. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that how we get back from the perception that Hartford is run down and beaten up and completely bankrupt to this rich environment where Hartford can once again regain that prominence is a question that's completely up for debate. But it's something that I would like to see more of as a native of Hartford myself. To have that be the perception of Hartford would be incredible.
And you talk about, cultural, a lot of, what was the word that you used?
Cultural activity
Yes,
that
culture.
exists in Hartford. Sure.
Yes, cultural activity. It is true that there is a lot of activities that involve, culture and all that. But there is also a dwindling amount of, businesses that are oriented towards certain cultures.
Okay.
And I know a few businesses in Hartford, I'm not going to say, names, that actually moved out of Hartford because it's totally changing the landscape, everything, economy-wise. And they moved out to a different town or a different city, the businesses. And,
Okay. Well, certainly that has been a common occurrence for many, many years. That, too, seems to fluctuate, by the way, with the rise in crime. In
Yes.
the early 90s, Hartford saw, just as Chicago did, a huge increase in crime. And the result of that was a mass exodus of people and businesses from
Businesses,
Hartford
yep.
into surrounding suburbs. And so when we see that kind of activity occur in the form of criminal activity, the result is always a draining of those that the city can least afford to have leave. So it's unfortunate.
Yes.
Listen, I think I want to wrap up. I really thank you guys for engaging in this conversation with me. I thought it was productive,
Thank you for having us.
and
Thank you.
you're absolutely
Pleasure.
welcome. We hope to have this be the first of many more podcasts. There are always new topics that will surface. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
very much.